Hi everyone. Today I wanted to talk to you about strategies that we can use to improve student skill and performance in the HSC. The first strategy is embedding definitions. Too many students lose easy marks in the HSC because they don't know their definitions and they don't clearly understand the language or the terminology or the concepts that are embedded in the syllabus. So the process below will encourage students to place value on the importance of definitions. And if this is done in most subjects, the importance placed on knowing definitions will be consistently reinforced. Introducing the process in the junior school will help ensure that the importance of definitions is embedded well before HSC years. The process to follow when doing this is when beginning a new topic, begin with a definitions page, or you could call it a concepts page. Students can add to this throughout the topic. When setting examination papers or assessment tasks, always try to include definition questions and let students know that definitions will be examined or terminology. For seniors, provide explicit information in assessment tasks or test handouts and briefings about how and when definitions are to be included in their extended responses. Because this will help clarify for students how they need to use this terminology in order to strengthen their response. The next strategy that I wanted us to look at was ways to improve analysis and evaluation in our student responses. This is important because this process will assist students in understanding what the directive terms look like so that they can ensure they're applying these terms in their responses more effectively. It's also important that students focus on adding greater depth through their analysis or evaluation in order to achieve at a higher level. Currently, if we were to ask students in our classes what the meaning of those directive terms are, there would be very few students that would be able to respond. And in the study workshops that I've run with Year 12, they really do show a lack of understanding in this area. And it's critical for them to be able to move up the mark range or move into higher bands, because when we look at the marking criteria in the HSC, students can't move past a band 3 in most courses if they are not appropriately applying the directive terms or using those directive terms. They're capped at a band 3. So no matter how good their content understanding is, if they cannot demonstrate the application of that directive term, they can't access the higher mark range. So what we need to do when we're looking at setting up this process is use available data to identify a specific target or a specific area to target for student improvement. We want to show students the relationship between the rubric, the directive term, and the marking criteria. And I've put together some samples to show you of ways that you can do this. Create a checklist with students of things markers will look for in a superior response. We want to show students an annotated superior response or WAGL and help them to deconstruct it. We then want students to annotate the response themselves so they can show the understanding of the syllabus, of the examples that you've taken them through as you've deconstructed the response together, and have them show that they understand what it is that you've just taught them. The next step is to have students evaluate a sample weaker response and for them to look at the ways they would do things differently. What's missing? How can they use the criteria to help them identify where those gaps are? We then want students to rewrite that sample weaker response to make it a superior response. And this can be done individually. You can have students work in pairs or small groups as a way to build their skills in this area. And then we want to have students practice self-assess, and peer assess their responses. And doing this in a consistent way across courses will help to build the skills of students with their extended responses across all of our courses. But what's important for us to be aware of is that when we're teaching our content, teach exam technique at the same time. So we're teaching our content through the exam technique. This will make a difference to the student's skill development, and they'll understand how to apply that content more effectively. The next strategy is the modelling of those A range responses. So this process ensures that all students are engaged in that feedback process. It requires every student to do something practical about a critical aspect of an examination response or an assessment response. The process provides students who have not met criteria of the response with guidance to improve. It also will reinforce the importance of elements of the response for those who have met the criteria in a positive way. A benefit of this process is that it has the capacity to reduce the amount of time a teacher spends on marking out the errors on papers. And having students take a more involved approach in this feedback process will be really important again in helping them strengthen their extended responses. So the process for this strategy is to firstly select an aspect of student examination response in which there are common flaws or which have the potential for significant improvement. Teachers don't need to comment on these things on the students' feedback because they're going to be dealt with in class through the class exercise. We give students a list of critical elements that the response should contain to achieve an A range mark. We want to show students how these things relate to the mark scale and, if applicable, to the rubric, depending on if it's an extended response or a short answer response. We want to ask students to identify these things in another student's paper or have them work in pairs to do this, because for them to see this in other forms really helps to consolidate that understanding. And then finally, we want to have students work on enhancing the response by including either the missing elements or enhancing the elements that have been included. So you can see this strategy and the previous strategy of improving the responses through the analysis and evaluation really go hand in hand. And when we look at the first strategy of embedding the definitions, that will also help strengthen these responses. So the key message for today is don't tell me, show me, because we want students to show us their understanding. So step one is using the available data to identify a specific area to target for student improvement. And at this stage, when we're looking at, say, our RAP data analysis, it consistently highlights that writing is an area for improvement for our students. We want to show students the relationships between the rubric, the directive term, and the marking criteria. Because if they understand this, they'll understand the key elements that need to be included in their responses much more easily. We want to create checklists with students of the things the markers will look for in that superior response. Because if they can go back to these lists that we create with them, it will form a basis for them as they are self-assessing their work before they submit their response. We want to show students, as I said, the annotated superior model response and then help them deconstruct it. And this is really important that we do this through explicit instruction with the students. And do this on a consistent basis, because particularly as we are moving closer to our trial, HSC exams in term 3 and then the HSC, we need to make sure that the students are having consistent exposure to being able to practice writing these extended responses, because we know that these are the area of weakness. And in order to build their skills in this area, we need to make sure that we take them through each step very explicitly. Have students annotate the superior response themselves so they can highlight. And you might just pick a couple of key areas that you want them to annotate and find where evidence of those points. For example, finding evidence of the directive term through the response, or finding evidence of the application of key concepts through the response. Having students evaluate a sample weaker response. So through the assessment tasks that students complete, you could ask them to correct one of the weaker responses. Or alternatively, what you could do as a starting point is look at the sample response in the marking criteria from the HSC and have them use that to construct a response as well. Students need to rewrite the sample weaker responses in order to make it superior. And then most importantly, have students practice, self-assess, and also peer assess, because this way they'll collectively build their skills. So focus on how you can teach your content at the same time as you teach your exam technique, and teaching the content through that exam technique. So remember, in the HSC, it's not what students know that counts, it's what students show they know.